Since 1967, dozens of people have been executed in California, a state once known for having one of the toughest death penalty systems in America. Before facing death, each inmate was allowed to choose a final meal. And if they wanted, they could leave behind one last message for the world. Some apologized. Some cursed. Some said nothing, as if they never existed. In this video, you'll hear the final meals and final words of death row inmates who once shook California to its core. From crimes that rocked the nation to moments spent inches from death. If you're drawn to true stories of crime and justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's coming next. And now, let's uncover the final moments of California's condemned. 1. Burton Wilbur Abbott, California. On April 28, 1955, the quiet streets of Berkeley, California were shattered by the sudden disappearance of Stephanie Bryan, a 14-year-old schoolgirl. She vanished on her way home from school, sending her family into despair and the community into panic. 3 months later, a shocking discovery was made in the basement of Burton Wilbur Abbott's home in Alameda. His wife stumbled upon Stephanie's handbag, school ID, and eyeglasses. Abbott, a college accounting student at the University of California, instantly became the prime suspect. Police soon found Stephanie's body near the Abbott family cabin in Trinity County, a discovery that only tightened the noose around him. Abbott maintained his innocence to the very end, but after a controversial trial, he was sentenced to death. On March 15, 1957, Burton Abbott was executed in the gas chamber at San Quentin State Prison, just minutes after the governor denied a last-minute appeal for clemency. His final meal included jumbo shrimp fried French style with cocktail sauce, a serving of ravioli, a green salad with vinegar and oil, a slice of chocolate cake, and a pack of Salem cigarettes. When asked if he had any final words, Abbott whispered to the doctor, "I can't confess, doctor. Just think what it would do to my mother. She couldn't take it." To this day, Abbott's story divides public opinion. Was he a cold-blooded killer? Or an innocent man caught in the blind machinery of justice? 2. Clarence Ray Allen, California. At 76 years old, Clarence Ray Allen became the oldest person executed in modern California history. But his name is remembered not just for his age, but for a string of calculated murders carried out from behind bars. It all began in 1974, when Allen organized a robbery at Fran's Market in Fresno. After being caught and sentenced, he didn't seek redemption. He sought revenge. Without a weapon in hand, and nowhere near the crime scene, Allen gave the order, from his prison cell. On September 5, 1980, a hitman acting under his command returned to Fran's Market and killed 3 young people: Brian Schlietwitz, 27, Josephine Rocha, 17, and Douglas White, 18. Allen was sentenced to death. And nearly 30 years later, he met the same fate he had dealt to others. On January 17, 2006, in the early hours before dawn, Allen was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin. His last meal was unusually specific: buffalo steak, Kentucky fried chicken, white meat, fried bread, sugar-free pecan pie, sugar-free black walnut ice cream, and a glass of whole milk. He let the ice cream melt for an hour, then made his own milkshake, by hand. Calm. Unbothered. Then came his final words, like something out of a Western movie. "Hoka hey, it's a good day to die. Thank you very much. I love you all. Goodbye." His words echoed with mystery, part poem, part chill. And it left behind one final question. In the mind of a man who plotted death, was there still a spark of human conscience? Or were those words just another part of the performance, gone in the silence that follows the final injection? 3. Stephen Wayne Anderson, California. An 81-year-old piano teacher. A quiet night in Bloomington, California. And a cold-blooded intruder. That was the scene on May 26, 1980, a night that still sends chills down the spine. Stephen Wayne Anderson wasn't just some random criminal. He was a professional hitman. A serial killer. That night, he broke into the home of Elizabeth Lyman. He didn't know her. Had no personal grudge. He broke in, simply because he could. When she discovered him, Anderson pulled the trigger without hesitation, killing the elderly woman on the spot. But what made the crime even more disturbing wasn't just the murder, it was what happened next. Anderson walked into her kitchen and made himself a meal. Calm, collected, as if he were in his own home. When police arrived, he didn't run. He didn't resist. He didn't flinch. He later confessed to at least 6 contract killings in Las Vegas, and even admitted to murdering a fellow inmate in a Utah prison. On January 29, 2002, Anderson was executed by lethal injection. His final meal was oddly simple: 2 grilled cheese sandwiches, radishes, a pint of cottage cheese, hominy corn, a slice of peach pie, and a pint of chocolate chip ice cream. No final words. No apology. No regrets. Just silence, cold and absolute. The same silence he carried through every crime, and to his very last breath. 4. Donald J. Beardslee, California. 1 murder. He was forgiven. The second? There was no turning back. In 1969, in Missouri, Donald J. Beardslee killed Laura Griffin after meeting her at a bar. He was sentenced to 19 years in prison. But incredibly, after just 7 years, he was paroled. Freedom didn't change him. It only gave him another chance to kill. In 1981, while still on parole, Beardslee got involved in a drug-related conflict in Redwood City, California. This time, 2 young women, Patty Gedling, 19, and Stacy Benjamin, 23, were brutally murdered. Once again, death followed his name. For years, his case stood as a chilling reminder of what happens when the justice system places trust in the wrong hands. On January 19, 2005, Beardslee was executed by lethal injection. In his final hours, he requested no special meal. He quietly ate the standard prison food: chili mac, salad, and dessert. Plain. Ordinary. Just like the flat, emotionless stare he carried to the end. He offered no last words. No confession. No apology. Just silence, the final statement of a man who never knew remorse. 5. William George Bonin, California. From truck driver to serial killer, William George Bonin was the embodiment of terror on California's highways. Known as the Freeway Killer, Bonin terrorized the region from the late 1960s through 1980. His crimes were beyond brutal. He raped, tortured, and murdered at least 21 boys and young men. Victims he lured, abducted, and dumped along lonely stretches of road. He was convicted of 14 murders, confessed to 21, and likely killed more. On February 23, 1996, Bonin was executed by lethal injection. He didn't ask for mercy. Didn't plead for his life. He said he was ready to die. His last meal reflected his strange appetite: 2 pepperoni and sausage pizzas, 3 servings of chocolate ice cream, and 3 6-packs of Coca-Cola and Pepsi. A full-blown feast, fitting for the monster people called the Freeway Killer. He said nothing in his final moments. But in a written statement, Bonin showed no remorse. As the needle went in, silence followed, the same silence he left behind for every life he took without a second thought. 6. Caryl Chessman, California. Caryl Chessman was a name that stirred debate across America for over a decade. He became a symbol of the fight against the death penalty in the 20th century. In January of 1948, Chessman was convicted of multiple crimes including armed robbery, kidnapping, and sexual assault. He was dubbed the Red Light Bandit for his method of impersonating a police officer, attaching a red light to his car, pulling over couples, and attacking them. But what set his case apart wasn't just the crime, it was how long he fought to stay alive. For 12 years, Chessman wrote books from his prison cell, filed hundreds of appeals, and became one of the most widely known death row inmates in the world. Writers, intellectuals, and even Pope Pius XII pleaded for his life. But in the end, on May 2, 1960, after 8 stays of execution, Chessman entered the gas chamber at San Quentin. His final meal was as simple as it gets: a ham and cheese sandwich and a bottle of Coca-Cola. No drama, no indulgence, just a quiet end to a long, high-profile battle. He offered no final words. Only silence. Silence from a man who once shouted through books, but left the world in the hiss of poison gas. A death, a life, and a long chapter in America's criminal history, closed. 7. Billy Cook, California. Billy Cook. A name that still echoes through the once peaceful highways of America. For 22 days in late 1950, the nation was shaken by a string of brutal murders stretching from Illinois to California. Born on December 23, 1928, in Joplin, Missouri, Cook grew up in tragedy. Orphaned at a young age, abandoned by family, raised in reform schools, his childhood was filled with pain, isolation, and deep resentment. By late December of 1950, Billy Cook's killing spree had begun. He hijacked a car, kidnapped and murdered an entire family of 5, including 2 young children, then went on to kill a traveling salesman. His crimes were not only ruthless but also defiant. He moved across state lines, challenging law enforcement and triggering one of the largest federal manhunts of the time. Eventually captured in Mexico and extradited to the U.S., Cook was sentenced to death. On December 12, 1952, he was executed in the gas chamber at San Quentin. He left no final words. Just silence, as if he had nothing left to explain, no regrets to voice. His last meal was simple, yet complete: fried chicken, French fries, peas, pumpkin pie, coffee, and milk. Uncomplicated, unremarkable, starkly at odds with the violence and chaos that marked his life. No farewell. No tears. Just the end of a man who brought terror to America's roads. 8. Elizabeth Ann Duncan, California. Elizabeth Ann Duncan didn't fit the typical image of a killer. She wasn't cold, wasn't violent, didn't wear a mask. She was a middle-aged woman with a quiet appearance and an obsessive love that ran dangerously deep for her own son. In 1958, in California, Elizabeth took a step no one could have imagined. She paid 2 men, Augustine Baldonado and Luis Moya, $1,000 to murder her pregnant daughter-in-law, Olga Duncan. Olga was married to Frank Duncan, Elizabeth's only child. In her mind, the marriage was a threat, a wedge between her and her son. And even the unborn baby, her grandchild, was seen as competition. Olga was kidnapped, murdered, and buried in a shallow roadside grave. The case stunned the state, not only for its cruelty but for its bizarre motive: a mother killing her daughter-in-law just to keep her son to herself. Elizabeth denied everything, but the testimony of the hitmen sealed her fate. She was sentenced to death, becoming the first woman executed in California in decades. On August 8, 1962, Elizabeth was put to death in the gas chamber at San Quentin. Just before her execution, she gave a final plea, equal parts denial and heartbreak: "I'm innocent. Where's Frank?" Her son, Frank Duncan, a lawyer, was not present. Her last meal was modest: a steak and a salad. No feast, no celebration, no fancy requests. Just a plain meal for a tragic end, of a mother who loved too much and lost everything because of it. 9. Barbara Graham, California. Barbara Graham had lived many lives: nightclub girl, con artist, troubled mother, but she became forever known by a name that shocked 1950s America: Bloody Babs. On March 9, 1953, Barbara and 2 accomplices, Jack Santo and Emmett Perkins, broke into the home of Mabel Monahan, a 64-year-old widow living in Burbank, California. They believed she was hiding cash and jewelry, but they found nothing. What they left behind was far worse. Monahan, a lonely elderly woman, was beaten and suffocated with a rag stuffed in her mouth. Her death wasn't just a tragedy, it sparked a trial riddled with controversy. Was Barbara the mastermind? Or just a woman pulled into a deadly plan? Barbara insisted she was innocent. But damning testimony from an undercover cop she tried to bribe, and from her own accomplices, sealed her fate. She was sentenced to death. On June 3, 1955, Barbara Graham walked into the gas chamber at San Quentin. Before that, she made an unusual request: to be blindfolded. As if she didn't want the world to see the fear in her eyes. Her final meal was simple: a chocolate milkshake and a scoop of chocolate ice cream. Just a small moment of sweetness before the end. And just before the gas was released, Barbara spoke her final words: sharp, bitter, unforgettable. Good people are always so sure they're right. No apology. No explanation. No tears. Just a final jab on the edge of justice and death. And with that, Barbara Graham's name was etched forever into America's death penalty history. 10. Robert Alton Harris, California. Robert Alton Harris wasn't new to the California justice system. Born in 1953, Harris grew up in violence and abuse, cycling through juvenile detention and prison. But none of that could excuse what he did on one July morning in 1980. On July 18th, in San Diego, Harris and his brother abducted two 16-year-old boys, John Mayeski and Michael Baker, while they were on their way to buy hamburgers. The boys were driven to a remote area, and in a moment of pure coldness, Harris shot them both. He then stole their car and used it in a bank robbery. He was quickly caught and sentenced to death. But his execution wouldn't come easy. For more than a decade, Harris became the face of a legal tug-of-war, court delays, protests, and debates over capital punishment. Finally, on April 21, 1992, Robert Alton Harris entered the gas chamber at San Quentin, becoming the first person executed in California since the state reinstated the death penalty in 1977. He showed no signs of fear. His final meal was nothing short of a feast: a bucket of 21 pieces of Kentucky Fried Chicken, 2 large Domino's pizzas, ice cream, a bag of jelly beans, 6 cans of Pepsi, and a pack of Camel cigarettes. Though he requested Domino's, prison staff served him Tombstone Pizza instead, a morbidly ironic twist, given the name. Before the gas filled the chamber, Harris left behind one final quote: cinematic, philosophical, and haunting. You can be a king or a street sweeper, but everybody dances with the Grim Reaper. A chilling end for a man who brought terror to innocent lives, and a grim start to California's modern era of executions. 11. David Edwin Mason, California. David Edwin Mason didn't kill for money. He didn't kill for revenge. He killed because he wanted to. Between March and December of 1980, in Oakland, California, Mason committed a series of brutal murders. His victims were elderly, vulnerable, defenseless, unable to fight back. He crept into their homes at night and ended their lives without remorse, as if it were routine. But even prison couldn't stop him. In 1982, already behind bars for 4 murders, Mason killed again, this time, his own cellmate. Cold. Calculated. Unstoppable. On August 24, 1993, David Mason was executed in the gas chamber at San Quentin, becoming the last person in California to die by lethal gas before the state switched to lethal injection. He didn't request a special final meal. He ate whatever the other inmates were served that day. No celebration, no indulgence. The only thing he asked for was a glass of ice water. In his final moments, Mason sat silently, drinking water, waiting. And when asked if he had any last words, his response was simple, direct, and devoid of emotion. No, Warden, I want to proceed. Thank you, Warden. A final sentence as cold as his crimes. As unfeeling as the way he extinguished lives in the dark. 12. Robert Lee Massie, California. Some people live lives caught in a loop of violence, blood, and too late redemption. Robert Lee Massie was one of them. On January 7, 1965, in San Gabriel, California, Massie shot and killed 48-year-old Mildred Weiss during a brutal robbery. The crime earned him a death sentence, but when California temporarily suspended capital punishment, his sentence was commuted to life in prison. And yet, just months after being granted clemency and released in 1978, Massie killed again. On January 3, 1979, he walked into a small liquor store in San Francisco, confronted the owner, Boris G. Naumoff, and murdered him for the cash in the register. A man once given a second chance had chosen the same path again, only this time, there would be no way back. On March 27, 2001, Robert Lee Massie was executed by lethal injection. Before walking to the execution chamber, he requested a final meal: 2 vanilla milkshakes, crispy French fries, fried oysters, and a soft drink. It sounded like a child's treat, an oddly innocent contrast to a life drenched in darkness. And in his final moment, Massie didn't cry. He didn't defend himself. He simply spoke one sentence: heavy as stone. Forgiveness, giving up all hope for a better past. It was more than a confession, it was a bitter truth. Some pasts cannot be rewritten, even with a lifetime. 13. Aaron Mitchell, California. On the morning of February 15, 1963, a gunshot rang out on a Sacramento street, ending the life of police officer Arnold Gamble. The man who pulled the trigger was Aaron Mitchell, a young, angry man who would become the last person in California executed in the gas chamber. The murder of a police officer ignited public outrage and marked a turning point in the state's debate over the death penalty. Throughout his trial and incarceration, Mitchell presented a confusing picture. At times, he showed remorse. Other times, defiance. And occasionally, he claimed to be guided by divine visions. On April 12, 1967, Mitchell was executed in the gas chamber at San Quentin. It was the final time California would use this method before halting executions altogether. His final meal was strangely simple: a serving of fried chicken, buttered bread, and a glass of milk. Not extravagant, not symbolic, just enough to satisfy a soul torn between reality and religious delusion. When asked for any last words, he didn't apologize. He didn't offer clarity. Instead, he shouted a bold and delusional declaration: "I am Jesus Christ." And with those words, Aaron Mitchell left this world the way he lived in it, provocative, divisive, and surrounded by questions no one could answer. 14. Jaturun Siripongs, California. On December 15, 1981, a robbery in Garden Grove, California, turned into a brutal tragedy. 2 people were killed. Store manager Pakovan Watnaporn, age 36, was strangled to death, while employee Kwach Nguyen, age 52, was stabbed multiple times in the head and neck. The killer, Jaturun Siripongs, a Thai national who had once been a Buddhist monk and who later became a cold-blooded murderer. He was arrested 2 days later while trying to use one of the victim's credit cards. Throughout the trial, Siripongs denied being the actual killer, instead blaming an unnamed accomplice who was never identified. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. The jury didn't hesitate, guilty, and sentenced to death. On February 9, 1999, Jaturun Siripongs was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin. The journey of a fallen monk ended in silence. No last words, no final tears. His last meal reflected the ascetic life he once lived: 2 cans of Lucky Arctic iced tea and 2 cups of Mission Pride canned peaches. No meat. No feast. No indulgence. Just a quiet, humble farewell. No one knows if he truly felt remorse. But his silence in those final moments left behind an unsettling emptiness, forcing everyone who followed his case to ask, when does a soul begin to lose its way? 15. Juanita Spinelli, California. She was known as the Duchess, but Juanita Spinelli's power didn't come from royalty. It came from the shadows. In San Francisco during the 1930s, she led a gang of homeless teens, lost kids she trained to become criminals. Behind the mask of a mother figure, she taught them how to steal, how to rob, even how to kill. But her criminal empire began to unravel in 1940. When one of her protégés committed murder during a robbery, Spinelli feared he might talk. So she poisoned him and staged the scene to look like a drowning accident. But the truth caught up with her. She was arrested, convicted, and became the first woman ever executed in California's gas chamber. On November 21, 1941, inside the death chamber at San Quentin, the Duchess met her end. She had no last words. No apologies. No plea for mercy. Her final meal, served at midnight, was as strange as her life: turkey and a hamburger. Ordinary food for a life that was anything but. No tears. No redemption. Just cold silence from the woman who taught a generation how to commit evil. 16. Thomas Martin Thompson, California. In September of 1981, a brutal murder sent shockwaves through California. Ginger Fleishley, a 20-year-old college student, vanished after a night out with friends. 3 days later, her body was found in a shallow grave, wrapped in a sleeping bag and blankets traced back to the apartment of Thomas Martin Thompson. Every clue pointed to him. Thompson was charged with rape and murder, though he insisted on his innocence throughout the trial. His case dragged on for nearly 2 decades, tangled in appeals and controversy. Over time, the name Thomas Thompson became a lightning rod in the debate over capital punishment and possible flaws in the justice system. But on July 14, 1998, the sentence was carried out. He was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin. His final meal? A lavish spread: Alaskan king crab with melted butter, spinach salad, pork fried rice, Chinese-style pork ribs, hot fudge sundae, and 6 cans of Coca-Cola. A feast that tasted like life, right before the silence. Thompson left in silence. And perhaps that silence, in a case still debated today, speaks louder than anything he could have said. 17. Keith Daniel Williams, California. On a night in October of 1978, in Merced, California, Keith Daniel Williams and accomplice Robert Tyson committed a shocking crime. They shot 2 men, Miguel Vargas and Salvador Vargas, execution style, straight to the head. But it didn't stop there. They abducted Lourdes Meza, Miguel's girlfriend, and drove her to a remote area near Tuolumne City, where Williams coldly ended her life with multiple gunshots. The legal battle stretched on for years. Questions were raised about motives, about each man's role in the crime. But in the end, the court upheld the highest sentence. On May 3, 1996, Williams was executed by lethal injection. His last meal was humble but classic: fried pork chops, a baked potato with butter, asparagus, salad with blue cheese dressing, a slice of apple pie with ice cream, and a glass of whole milk. A full plate, for one final moment. Keith Daniel Williams said nothing before closing his eyes. And that silence was the quiet end to a tragedy that had already claimed too much. 18. Stanley Tookie Williams, California. Stanley Tookie Williams was one of the most notorious names on the streets of Los Angeles. A co-founder of the Crips gang, he later became a controversial symbol of both crime and the possibility of redemption. In 1979, he was convicted of murdering 4 people in 2 separate robberies. The victims included Albert Owens, a convenience store worker, and 3 members of the Young family, Yini, Saishai, and their daughter Yichin Lin. Cold, calculated murders that shook California to its core. Sentenced to death in 1981, Williams would spend over 2 decades on death row. And during that time, public opinion began to split. Some saw him as a remorseless killer. Others saw a changed man, who wrote children's books and campaigned against gang violence. On December 13, 2005, the sentence was carried out by lethal injection. His last meal was as simple as his final hours: a bowl of oatmeal and a glass of milk. He made no final plea. No apology. No explanation. Just a long silence, between 2 worlds, between guilt and redemption. In the end, all that remained was a name, and a death warrant fulfilled. What do you think? Can redemption come too late? Leave a comment and let us know. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, so you won't miss what's next on Crimes Unearthed 911. See you in the next story.